Okay, so first of all, let's just get this out of the way. A lot of people will deny it, but the fact of the matter is this. As a man, your race has a huge impact on how attractive you are to women. And it's funny because there's a lot of people that will deny this simple fact until they're blue in the face, but a lot of those same people, if you ask them about like regular racism, like ask them about if they think black men are perceived unfairly in society due to racial stereotypes, most of those same people will say, yes, of course. And if you say otherwise, you're probably some kind of racist yourself. That's what they'll say. Yet, when a man vents or complains about how he has trouble in his dating life due to his race, everybody wants to say, no, it's not your race. You just need to work on your personality. There's no way your race is the problem. Or, just some basic just bro advice like that. And I don't know exactly why that is, but it's not really surprising. I mean, I think part of it is because, say, when an Asian man vents about how he struggles to attract women due to his race, a lot of people will just picture an attractive Asian man they've seen before, like a K-pop idol or an actor or something, somebody that has looks, money, and status. And so they think, no, I can think of an extremely attractive Asian man, so it can't be your race that's the problem. And of course, there are universally attractive men of every race, but it's like people just have a mental block when it comes to these controversial topics. But whether you like the sound of it or not, certain races of men are always going to struggle more than others when it comes to attracting women, especially Western women. Because, for one, they have a lot of negative stereotypes working against them, and two, men of certain races are just more likely than others to have certain physical features that are generally deemed to be undesirable, like certain skin tones or certain facial features. So, if you know anything about this channel, you know that I am a giga enlightened black pill truth teller. So, I'm not here to offer any solutions because solutions are cope. But what I will do is this. I'm going to make a tier list ranking every race in terms of how attractive men of that race are to women. And hopefully this doesn't get my channel banned or anything, but anyways, yeah, let's get started. To start it off, I'm going to talk about white men. So there's a common acronym in black pill spaces, you may have heard it before, and it's JBW, which stands for Just Be White. And it's pretty self-explanatory, but the meaning behind JBW is just that if you're a white man, you pretty much can't fail when it comes to dating. And I get a lot of comments on my videos talking about JBW, and for the most part, it's just something people use to trivialize my problems. So I think JBW is a bit of an oversimplification of how things really are. But with that said, it is true that white men have it easier than any other race when it comes to dating. So white men are easily S tier on the male race dating prospects hierarchy. But obviously, and this goes for any race you can think of, but there are attractive white men and there are ugly white men. Both of these things exist. So literally just being white does not mean that you're going to be successful with women. Trust me on that. I know firsthand. But I do think it's true, for example, that if you have a white man and, say, an Indian man who are perfectly equal in terms of objective facial attractiveness, like they literally have the same face with only differences being things like skin tone, hair color, hair texture, and eye color, the majority of women will perceive the white man as being much more attractive than the Indian man. And I'm not a scientist or anything, so I'm not going to act like I fully understand all the reasons why that is, but I'm pretty sure it has something to do with how white men are perceived to be of higher status in society. Like, people just mentally associate white men with wealth and status and being cool. Like, most of the most famous actors and musicians and lots of professional athletes are white, so people just have that perception. And obviously, in most of the Western world, white people are the largest group, so white is kinda the default. It's the comfortable choice, and people like that. And another thing about being a white man is that white men are perceived as being attractive on a global scale. Like, white men are in the S tier pretty much worldwide. And that's probably just because for most of recent history, Western nations have had a lot of cultural dominance on a global scale. Like, American movies are popular in every country, and English language music is popular in every country. So, a white man will still be at the top or near the top of the male attractiveness hierarchy, even if he goes to Asia or Africa or South America. But one more thing I want to say about being white and JBW. See, in my life, my experience growing up, I went to a high school that was like 97% white. So just think about that for a second. Do you think JBW helped me in my all white high school? Like, for sure, it would have been much more difficult for me if I had been any other race, but just being white sure as hell did not give me any advantage over all the other white guys, which was pretty much literally all of the other guys. And I think that's something a lot of people just don't consider when it comes to the whole JBW concept. JBW is meaningless if everybody else around you is also white. But yeah, being white as a man is obviously S tier. White men are seen as the default, and that makes them the most flexible in terms of styling. Like, a white man can easily niche max as a hipster, a bad boy, a jock, a punk rocker, a preppy rich guy, a corporate CEO, stock trading, suit wearing kind of guy, or just whatever. Pretty much any niche you can think of, white men can easily fit into that niche, and it makes sense. And that's something that most other races can't really do. Like, it's going to be a lot more difficult for an Asian man to be perceived as a bad boy, or for a black man to be perceived as a preppy country club guy. So, yeah, I think I've said enough about the advantages of being white, so let's move on. Okay, next up is black. So, I think it's actually pretty difficult to rank black men in terms of how attractive they are to women because it's really a very polarizing thing. There are women out there that absolutely refuse to ever date a black man, and there are also plenty of women out there that only want to date black men. Of course, what women say and what women actually do aren't really the same thing, so, I'm sure plenty of those women that act like they would never ever date a black man, if they were approached by Jeremy Meeks or some famous NBA player or something, they might just happen to make an exception. And likewise, the women that say they only date black men, I doubt they'd really be turning down Channing Tatum or whoever. But yeah, you get my point. But when it comes to overall appeal, like if we can say in general, how attractive do women perceive black men to be? I think I'd have to put black men in the B tier. So, for one thing, black men are typically seen as more masculine than other races, which is definitely a good thing when it comes to attracting women. A black man can easily niche max as an athlete or a bad boy, which are probably two of the most popular niches in terms of how desirable they are to women. And black people also have a lot of cultural power with there being so many black celebrities, athletes, musicians, actors, etc. But of course, a lot of what I'm saying is specific to African Americans in America because I really don't think the average black man is going to do so well trying to date in a place like South Korea or something like that. But he might have decent success in certain European countries or even South American countries. So overall, I'd have to put black men in the B tier. Up next is Hispanic. And I know this isn't actually a race. Like, a Hispanic person technically could be black, white, native, mixed, or even Asian, I guess. But, I'm trying to keep things simple here. So, when I talk about Hispanic men, I'm talking about the most common type of Hispanic person you see in the United States. I know that might not be the most accurate representation on a global scale, but whatever, that's how I'm doing it. So when I say Hispanic, I'm talking about people like the average Mexican or South American. And you know what I'm talking about. There's some mix of European, native, and maybe African ancestry. They have brown skin, dark hair, and they're usually short. Okay? So that's what I'm talking about. In terms of how attractive Hispanic men are to women, I think they rank in the C tier. Hispanic men have a lot working against them. They tend to be on the shorter side, and even though Spanish language music is pretty popular worldwide, the Hispanic race is still perceived by a lot of people as being undesirable because they're perceived as being poor. You know, when you think of a Mexican immigrant family's home, you probably picture a small house in a bad neighborhood with too many people living in it. You think of poverty. And Hispanic men are fairly well represented in professional sports, especially in baseball and soccer, but for whatever reason, they still don't have the perception of being athletic with the general public. But what Hispanic men do have going for them is that, at least in the US, they are one of the largest groups. And Latino women do often date Latino men. So Hispanic men do have a lot of options in the US and the rest of the Americas, especially if they live in an area with a large Hispanic community. But for a Hispanic man that wants to date white women, that's going to be tough. As far as I can tell, white women just really don't care for Hispanic men. Generally speaking, of course, because, of course, a tall, lighter skinned Hispanic man with a chiseled jawline, he can probably do all right with white women. But the average Hispanic man in the US, he's gonna struggle. So it's a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to Hispanic men, so that's why I put them in the C tier. Now, East Asian men, this is kind of a tough one to rank. If you asked me 20 years ago, I would safely place East Asian men in the F tier. But in recent years, I think that may have changed. For a long time in the Western world, East Asian men have been stereotyped as being nerdy, unathletic, submissive, and just everything that is not masculine. And on top of that, they were historically one of the smaller groups in the US. So even though they fare best with women of their own race, that didn't leave them with a lot of options. And as we all know, East Asian women are some of the most likely to date outside their race. So Asian men truly have had a rough go of it throughout history. But East Asians have gained a ton of cultural dominance in recent years. Korean music and movies and television has been absolutely exploding in popularity, and Japanese media is also really popular, especially with younger generations, so I'm sure that has been helping a bit to combat some of the negative stereotypes that East Asian men face. And like I said earlier, there's been a long-held stereotype that Asian men are unathletic, but even that could be changing. Shohei Ohtani is quickly becoming one of the most famous athletes in the world, for good reason. I mean, he actually might be one of the greatest baseball players of all time, so I don't know. That may or may not help to combat the stereotypes. But overall, I still think all the negative stereotypes, it's just too much for most women to see through. So overall, I would have to put East Asian men in the D tier. But they are on the upswing, so things could change in the future. Now, when it comes to South Asian men, like Indian men, for example, I think we all know where they're going to rank here. And look, I know it's not fair. It sucks. I mean, it's just downright brutal. But South Asian men's reputation, especially in the Western world, it's at an all-time low. Not only are they considered unattractive by the majority of women, but they also have a reputation of being just weird and creepy, which really isn't fair. I mean, the reputation comes from fresh off the boat Indian men, and all the Indian men born in America have that reputation too, at first glance, even though they mostly just act like any other American guy. And I'm not going to go on and on about this, but South Asian men also probably have some physical features that are generally seen as unattractive. And a YouTuber called Drathan, he has a great video on this topic if you want more information on that, so check that out. But yeah, South Asian men are in the F tier. Middle Eastern men are a bit of a mixed bag, and part of that is because there is a pretty large amount of diversity in how Middle Eastern people can look. But I guess you could say that about most races, but either way, Middle Eastern men do have a relatively bad reputation in the Western world. You know, obviously they're seen as dangerous, like they could be terrorists or something. And then, of course, they have the whole Islam thing working against them. Like, you might think that East Asian men or South Asian men's religions would work against them. And they do to some degree, I'm sure. But for a long time throughout history, Muslims have kind of been seen as the enemy to Christians. Like, of all religions in the world, Islam probably has the worst reputation. And I mean, there are reasons for that, so I'm not even going to say that that's unfair. And of course, plenty of Middle Eastern men are actually Christian or just not religious at all, especially if they were born in America. But that doesn't matter as far as first impressions go. When a Western woman sees a Middle Eastern man, she's going to assume he's Muslim. And that's going to be a no-go for a lot of women. When it comes to actually how objectively attractive Middle Eastern men are, I mean, there's a lot of diversity there, but overall, I think they're probably not too bad. I mean, look at Ziz. He was a pretty good looking guy, and he's Kurdish, but I think Middle Eastern men are pretty good in terms of average height and physical features, but their reputation and negative stereotypes are a huge hurdle. So overall, I think I have to place Middle Eastern men in the C tier. So the next category is just kind of a catch-all for all the races that are less common in the Western world. So that includes Polynesian, Native American, and just whatever else is out there. I don't even know. It's kind of hard to rank these other races because it's like, on the one hand, they mostly live amongst their own communities, so they won't have as much competition from other races, so that probably helps them out. But if you think about things on an international level, like how well does a Polynesian man, for example, do if he goes to Europe or somewhere? I mean, it really depends. He's going to have a general mysterious foreignness about him. Like, a lot of women won't even be able to tell what his actual ethnicity is, so they'll probably just assume he's Mexican or something in America, or in Europe, she might think he's Arabic or Chinese or something. So it's really a crapshoot as to what stereotypes he's going to have to deal with. So I don't really know where to rank men of these other races, so I'm just going to put them in the C tier. Now, when it comes to men of mixed race, there's really no good way to rank them on the tier list. I mean, obviously, it depends on what the mix is. Like a man that's half black, half white, you can probably just assume his chances are similar to any other black man. But for a man that's half white and half East Asian, it's kind of a toss-up. I mean, some half Asian, half white men look pretty much 100% Asian, and others look half and half, and some might even look like they're Mexican or something. So how do you rank that? I really don't know. I mean, I could sit here and give a ranking for each and every different kind of mixed race. Like I could rank half black, half white, Blasian, half Indian, half Middle Eastern. But then we're going to be here all day, and I wouldn't even trust my own rankings anyways, because again, mixed race people can vary so much in appearance. It's just too hard to say anything for sure. So yeah, that's the rankings. And let me know in the comments if you disagree with any of my rankings. And I know I already said this, but I just want to make sure this point is understood. There is a certain level of attractiveness where women will just forget about any negative racial stereotypes they had. Like, Indian men are generally seen as very undesirable, but a tall, muscular Indian man with a chiseled jawline and hunter eyes, he's probably going to do pretty well, even with white women. So all these rankings are really only talking about average men of each race.